Hi, today I'm here to interview my dad because we are supposed to interview a hero that has lived. And my dad's father was a World War II veteran, so I'm here to ask him some questions about that. Dad, what was it like growing up with a father who was in the World War?
Well, he never really talked about it much. As a matter of fact, this report here was a uh, report that my daughter Melissa, your sister Melissa, did the last couple of years of his life, and she had to do a report on World War II, so she interviewed Grandpa. And it was the first time he ever really talked about his war experience, and it turned out to be a great report, and we pretty much heard the whole story from the day he went into basic training to VJ Day was the day the war ended. So it was terrific. So we're going to rely heavily on this report.
So, can you give me the summary of what it took to get into the war and his experience through the war?
Well, it started as your grandfather happened to be, he was a kid that grew up in Lake Forest, Illinois, which Lake Forest was a very different place back then. There was the very wealthy and the very blue collar, and he was on the blue collar side. His father died when he was 10 years old. During the Depression, his father had a job with the Northwestern Railroad as a conductor, and he caught pneumonia and continued to go to work every day, and literally worked himself to death because he was afraid he'd lose his job if he stayed home sick. So he was raised by a single mother. He was the youngest in the family. He was a little bit of a troublemaker, Lake Forest High School, which I know there's very few troublemakers at Lake Forest High School. He was one of them. Wasn't a great student, didn't have a lot of direction, and this is probably the first time you're hearing this about your grandpa, but was maybe in danger of getting kicked out of Lake Forest High School. So the war broke out in 1942, and he decided he was going to change his life and get his act together, and he joined the Marine Corps at 17 years old in June of 1942. And you could only enlist if you had your parents' permission, and my late Grandma Peg, signed for him. So right after registration, he was sent out to California to the newly opened Camp Pendleton in San Diego, California. It was open for World War II. It's a Marine Corps base. It's still there today. The plane landed in California, or in San Diego, and they were sent there for 6 months of intense training. The plane landed in San Diego. The base was actually in Ocean City, which was 60 miles away. So they walked off the airplane. 17 years old. He was a guy that was 5'5", about 140 pounds, soaking wet. They gave him everything they'd have for the next 4 years of their life, which was a uniform, a canteen, some rations, and a backpack. And they'd put all that pack on their back, which weighed about 75 pounds, and they had to hike 60 miles from San Diego to Ocean City. And they finally get to the base, and they're there, and everybody's just, oh man, we finally made it. They get to the gate of the base. I remember, this is one of the stories I remember Melissa asking them, and they're all fired up, and from the gate of the base to the barracks was another 13-mile hike. So they thought they were finished after 60 miles, they had another 13 to go. After that, they were sent to New Zealand. And they were sent to New Zealand for two reasons. One, they were, the United States government and the Defense Department was concerned New Zealand was the next place for Japan to attack because they had a lot of natural resources, and that's why Japan got in World War II. They took over. Japan doesn't have oil, minerals, things like that. So they were invading countries to take over, to steal their natural resources, and that's why they attacked the United States, because we have plenty of them. So he was sent to New Zealand to A, protect New Zealand against attack, and B, there were jungles in New Zealand that were similar to the jungles in the South Pacific, which is where they were going to be sent to battle. He was there for a total of 6 months. This was one of the worst parts. Let's see. The next, he was sent out in a boat off the coast of New Zealand for a total of a month, and they lived in and out of the water for that month to get used to the freezing conditions they were going to have to face getting in and off of boats to protect these Pacific islands. Plus, everybody was getting seasick because nobody had ever been on a boat before, so they were, hanging over the sides, puking, the whole shot. And guess where the next stop was?
Where?
Guadalcanal. Now, they were sent into Guadalcanal. That was his first stop in the Pacific Theater. The Army actually did the landing and the invasion of Guadalcanal, which was a strategic Japanese South Pacific island, and it was one of the bloodiest battles of the war. The Marines were sent in after the Army to do what was called mop-up, which sounds easy, but that was some of the worst fighting of the Battle of Guadalcanal, was to finish the battle. But after that, that's where the Marine Corps made their base during World War II. In Guadalcanal, they were bombed every night by Japanese planes. The planes, they named the planes, they named the Japanese Charlie. That was their code name for Japanese soldiers, Charlie. And they named the planes Washing Machine Charlie because the washing machine was just invented. And it was very, very noisy, the automatic washing machine. And that's the only thing these planes had ever sounded like were the new washing machines. So they named the planes Washing Machine Charlie. After they made their home base at Guadalcanal, they did the landing at Bougainville, which means, a bunch of troops were sent into a, Japanese stronghold, a Japanese property, and they were sent in the water, by what, if you've ever been to the Wisconsin Dells, they're called the Ducks. If you ride the Ducks, those were personal carriers that were sent off PT boats. The boys would be sent over to these islands on PT boats, and then these little carriers at 8, 9, 10 kids at a time would go in the water, and they'd have wheels on them, so they'd float and they'd come up to the island, and then the front would crank open. So one of Grandpa's jobs was to get off this duck, this personal carrier, crank it open, and the thing got stuck, right? So he's there trying to crank it back open, so to send it back to the PT boat to bring more kids in, and the thing stuck. So he was pretty comfortable with mechanical things. He found out what was wrong with it. He finally gets the thing cranked back up, sent back out. He leaves, goes on the island, turns around, and hears this explosion right behind him. And right where he was standing was a mortar that went off. That just missed him by 30 seconds, he said. And I think about, and when I was a kid growing up, that was the only experience he ever told me about the war, was cranking that thing back up, getting that thing back to the PT boat, and that bomb going off right where he was standing. Because I realized then, if it was 15 seconds earlier, I wouldn't be here right now. And you wouldn't be here right now, right? That's fate, So, anyway. All of these battles were successful. I mean, these scared to death kids were sent over, and the